Rulers of the ancient and medieval worlds lacked modern systems of surveillance or forensic evidence. To maintain order, they relied on extreme deterrence, punishments designed to be so physically and psychologically devastating that they ensured total compliance through the threat of trauma. Punishment number 10 was a staple of the Tower of London, the rat dungeon. This cell was located at the very bottom of the tower, positioned just below the waterline of the River Thames. When the tide rose, it forced rats out of their riverbed shelters and directly into the pitch-black dungeon. Prisoners, shackled and unable to defend themselves, would be slowly consumed by the starving animals over the course of several days or weeks. Number 9 shifted from environmental horror to mechanical precision, the rack. As this schematic shows, a victim's wrists and ankles were tied to a ratchet and pulley system. With incremental turns of the lever, the device applied increasing tension to the body's anchor points. While officially used for interrogation, the strain was so intense that truth became secondary to pain. Most victims would confess to anything to stop the rotation, often leaving the rack with completely dislocated joints or permanent paralysis. For punishment number 8, we move to the ocean for a brutal naval disciplinary tactic, keel hauling. A sailor's hands and feet were tied to a long rope that looped under the entire whip of the ship. The crew would then heave on the rope, dragging the sailor underneath the hull. This presented two simultaneous lethalities. The victim had to hold their breath long enough to clear the ship's beam, all while their flesh was shredded by the thousands of razor-sharp barnacles growing on the hull's exterior. These localized agonies were effective at controlling individuals in specific environments, like castles or ships. However, to exert control over an entire population, authorities realized they needed to move the terror out of the dungeon and into the public square. That led to punishments like number 7, being crushed by elephants. This was a common execution method in 19th century India, utilized for crimes ranging from enemy combat to failing to pay taxes. This was theater as much as it was execution. A mahout, or elephant driver, would command the beast to slowly crush the victim's limbs one by one before the final blow. It was a display of absolute dominance, proving that even nature's largest creatures were under the ruler's total control. Number 6, impalement, was used heavily in 17th century Egypt to eliminate highway robbers and rebels. Executioners used a greased wooden stake to pierce the victim, carefully avoiding vital organs to ensure they remained alive. These victims were then planted along busy roadways like grotesque signposts, left to suffer for hours as a direct warning to every traveler who passed by. Punishment number 5, poena culae, the penalty of the sack, was a highly symbolic Roman and German execution, specifically reserved for parricides, or those who murdered their own family members. The condemned was sewn into a thick leather bag, along with a live dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. Once the bag was airtight, it was tossed into the sea, ensuring the murderer died in a state of claustrophobic, multi-species chaos. Number 4, rat torture, weaponized the frantic survival instinct of an animal. Executioners would trap a rat in a metal bowl against a prisoner's torso and heat the outside of the bowl with coals. To escape the heat, the rat would burrow directly into the prisoner's body. This method persisted into the 20th century. During the Pinochet regime in Chile, interrogators used a device called the rectoscope to force rats into political dissidents, turning a medieval torture into a tool of modern state repression. These methods relied on high-intensity shock and public display to maintain order. But as we move into the top 3, the strategy changes. The focus shifts away from the immediate trauma of the body and toward the slow, grinding weapon of duration. Number 3 is gibbeting. After the Murder Act of 1752, English courts mandated that certain killers be hung in chains to serve as a permanent deterrent. Unlike a standard gallows, victims were placed inside an iron cage contoured to the human shape. These restraints were so tight they prevented any significant movement, leaving the prisoner suspended 30 feet in the air to die of exposure and dehydration. The punishment lasted far longer than the victim's life. The rotting remains were often left in these cages for decades. The primary goal was to inflict a long-term psychological burden on the local community, ensuring the crime was never forgotten. Number 2, scaphism, an ancient Persian method designed to turn bodies into a biological feeding ground. The victim was trapped between 2 boats and force-fed milk and honey until developing severe diarrhea. This filth, combined with more honey lathered on the skin, attracted swarms of insects and parasites that would consume the victim's flesh. Historical accounts describe victims surviving in this state for up to 17 days. Finally, number 1, the oubliette. The name comes from the French verb oubliette, meaning to forget. These were deep, vertical shafts built into the foundations of castles. The stone pits were often so narrow that the prisoner could not sit or stand. Once dropped inside, the metal hatch was securely closed, leaving the victim in total darkness to await death by starvation. Because these cells were rarely cleaned, new prisoners were frequently dropped onto the skeletal remains of those who had come before them. During a 1900 renovation of Leap Castle, workers discovered the physical evidence of this horrifying practice. Behind a chapel wall, they found a hidden oubliette containing so many human skeletons that they required multiple cartloads to remove them all. The oubliette represents the ultimate refinement of state punishment. By providing just enough food or water to keep a victim alive for years in a hole they could never leave, these authorities didn't just end a life. They effectively deleted a person from the world while they were still breathing.